Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to VetNet. My name is Jason Dozier, Manager of Plans and Operations here at Hire Heroes USA, and I'm joined by two of our esteemed veteran transition specialists, Kimberly Merkel out in our San Diego, California office, and Christian Ross out in Raleigh, North Carolina. And today we will be talking about completing the transition. Essentially, we're going to talk a little bit about all the different things that you can expect in your job search. So we'll touch on strategic planning, we'll touch on resume writing, we'll touch on networking, interviewing, the whole 9 yards of what to expect if you're out there looking for work and if you get a good lead. And before we transition to class, I just want to remind you all that we do classes every Wednesday at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've been doing this for about 2 years now. VetNet is an ongoing partnership between ourselves here at Hire Heroes USA, the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University, and Google. And these classes are intended to make sure that, as veterans, you are properly prepared to transition into the civilian world and be as prepared as possible as you look for work. And if you want more tailored and personalized services from us, feel free to sign up for services with us at hireheroesusa.org. And one of our esteemed veteran transition specialists, like Kimberly or Kristen, will work with you one-on-one until you find a job. So with that being said, Kim, go ahead and take it away.
Sure. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you, Jason. Like you said, my name is Kim, and I'm in the San Diego office. And just a real quick background about who I am and what I've done, and kind of part of my transition is that I've spent about the last 16, 17 years, all of my adult life so far, around Marines and sailors. I was a military spouse for 10 years, and then after that, I spent about 4.5, almost 5 years with a Marine Infantry Regiment taking care of the families when the unit was deployed. So spent that amount of time in and around the military lifestyle, lots of moving, so that meant lots of new jobs, learning to market myself, rewriting resumes. I do that for friends, and now I do that professionally. So really enjoy what I'm doing here, getting to know the veterans and all their specialties, and getting to be kind of a guidepost or a guiding light for them getting into this process. So, Kristen, if you want to go ahead, I'll hand that off to you.
Yeah, my name is Kristen Ross. I'm a veteran transition specialist out here in Raleigh. My background is actually not military. I come from working in nonprofits, particularly with high school and college age students, kind of doing the same sort of thing, getting them prepared for workforce, interviewing, resume writing, and just general office place skills. So that's kind of my background and what I bring, and I just enjoy working with veterans and helping them do the same kind of work. So, Kim, if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. All right. So what we want to do here with this completing the transition class is to give you an overview of what you're getting into or where you are in various stages of your transition. So just as a note to this, in this overview, like Jason mentioned earlier, we have more concentrated topics and classes about everything that we're going to cover. So I would really encourage and invite you to dive deeper into those classes as we mention them here. So you can find them on the VetNet basic training track, same place where you found us. So going through this, we're going to talk about developing your strategic plan. Real quickly, a little bit of what that means. Next, we're going to move into drafting your resume, building a network, and then successful interviewing techniques. So we'll move on to, you can follow along with us onto the next slide. The first piece is the strategic planning. So what that really entails is developing your plan, kind of taking an assessment of where you are and what the landscape looks like. So if you have no awareness of what that is, now is the time to take that time out to figure out, okay, what are my needs are? Am I going to be moving? What are my financial needs going to look like? What are my advantages as a veteran? What are my barriers? And all of that's going to play into your short range and long range plans. What networks do I need to warm up? Figuring out what you don't know. Most of us, when we move into this major career and transition shift, is you don't even know what you don't know. So this part of the phase of strategic planning is take an assessment of yourself, your family, getting the family members and spouses involved, geared up, motivated, and focused on what the landscape looks like, finding out what the resources are at your disposal, like Hire Heroes USA and others, and knowing which ones are going to be beneficial and useful for you, and then just getting acquainted with the employment market. So we'll jump into our next slide about approaching our transition. So Kristen, I'll give you a chance here to speak to this one, talking about introducing these aspects.
Okay, so approaching your transition, a lot of it Kim just kind of went through briefly. Recognizing your barriers and your advantages. You know, what negative aspects do people kind of have in their mind when they're approaching hiring veterans? The big thing that comes up is PTSD. Everybody thinks that you come out of the military with PTSD, but that's not true. So it's, you know, kind of moving past that. But what advantages do you have? You have kind of greater aspects to lead team members and things like that that other people in the civilian workforce don't have. You have greater opportunities for education that you know, people in the civilian world don't necessarily have. So, you know, even though you have these barriers, you have great advantages that you can really take advantage of, and it's really how you can you know, use these to propel you forward. Do you have more on that, Kim?
Nope, I think we're going to move on to the next slide for talking about these barriers that you've mentioned. What are some of those things? And Kristen's already touched on one of those things, you know, moving into the civilian world, and I kind of call it like the wild, wild west a little bit, because it's anything and everything. And getting an assessment of what that is, you know, what is the civilian sitting across the table from you, or the guy standing next to you in line to grab a coffee, what does he know about veterans? Maybe he thinks you're a hero. You know, seen in enough war movies and has a high regard. In general, most civilians have high regard. On the other hand, you know, what do we hear about in the media? We hear all the bad news stories. And so there's these kind of two ends of the spectrum. You're somewhere between a hero and, I guess, like a raging monster who probably has PTSD, or they're going to assume you do. And we know that neither of those are, you're going to fall along the line. So you need to move into this situation knowing what those advantages are. So we talk about what your advantages and your barriers. Is your resume full of military jargon? Does a civilian pick it up and can understand what your background is? Do you know what your transferable skills are? Do you even know what I mean by when I say transferable skills? What are your expectations? You know, I've talked to, and Kristen as well, has talked to a lot of veterans who expect that they can continue to progress their career into higher levels of responsibility and authority, and that's not always the case, because you're making this huge, it's not just a side step, it's not just a step up, it's be prepared to potentially take a step back, establish your credibility into a new organization, and then move up. So, and that's when they say get your foot in the door. So it can sound really intimidating, but that's why you have resources here to kind of help you lay that map in front of you and shine a light to say, okay, let's actually get some realistic sense of where I'm at. Like I mentioned, there's various stereotypes and social stigmas. You never know what you're walking into. If you find yourself talking with someone, networking, or interviewing, where they're coming from. So I think in your mind, you've already done some of that homework to prepare yourself. You know, okay, don't know how this person is going to respond or know or feel about veterans, so they might think I'm, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread. They might think I'm, you know, a ticking time bomb, you know, full of combat injuries or whatever. You don't know that, but having your answers prepared, having a mature mindset about it, being the professional that you are, to say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I bring to the table, this is the value I bring to your company. So we have a quote here on our slide from The Honest Truth. It's from the Call of Duty Endowment. There's a video on YouTube that talks more about this. And the quote is, veterans feel that hiring managers are wary of them and fear that they've been brainwashed, are uneducated, and will snap at any moment. So that's already one person's feedback on what you might be facing, and that's a barrier that you've not even created for yourself. That society has created that for you. So just something I always keep in the back of your mind to be prepared to address that responsibly and professionally. All right, so we'll move on to advantages. Talking about advantages for employment as a veteran. There's a lot of things you bring to the table, and you'll probably need to spell a lot of them out. Civilians aren't going to have an idea of the level of authority and responsibility that's been granted to you at a very early stage in your career. I mean, that's one of the empowering things about you having military experience or being in the military community. If you're a spouse, you're much more entrepreneurial minded. That your commanding officer, your leadership is your senior staff NCO is going to give you, they're going to tell you, hey, you just need to get this done. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. They're going to give you the freedom to kind of figure that out. Those kinds of situations don't happen as frequently in the civilian sector as they do in the military. Some companies have that attitude, but it's not nearly as prevalent. So you're going to be walking into the scene having had much more authority and experience than your civilian counterpart. So that's a huge sell. That's a huge value that you bring to the table. You've been dropped into different parts of the world and said, get the job done, and you say, aye, sir, or ma'am. So you're resilient. You're focused on what you can do. Doesn't matter where they put you. You've got the job done and can focus on that. And you're very team-minded. And spouses, this applies to you, and I'll speak to that for a moment. You've learned through the network of family resources and using your networks and relying on your networks through extended separations from your service member, your veteran, and then rallying those aspects to your benefit. So leading on a team, knowing how to nurture a team, how to train a team, working as a teammate, that's a real strength that you're going to bring to the company. As well as the final point that I'll make here, your strong organizational commitment. For a lot of you separating from the military, you joined after 9/11 or you served after 9/11 during a time of war, and that's a scary concept for most civilians. They don't have that level of commitment. So that's going to bring your loyalty and your dedication and the level of professionalism that you're going to bring to that organization as one of your key advantages of being a veteran and working for a civilian as a veteran. But Kristen, is there anything more you can add to that?
I think you really hit most of those advantages and disadvantages. And it's really just kind of taking stock of both sides and seeing what you need to do to get from where you are to where you would like to be.
All right, good, thank you. All right, so we've already discussed strategic planning and some advantages and disadvantages. Let's move into resume writing. So we're going to get into a little bit more meat and potatoes, but remember, for more detailed classes on this, we have a separate resume writing class. So we'll discuss briefly about some of the techniques and the tools. What is a resume? There might be some misconceptions out there about what it is and how to create one. So we'll do that. So Kristen, I've been doing a lot of talking. This is, if you want to introduce our different formats here.
Sure. So your resume is what is essentially going to get you your interview. It is that kind of first picture that people tend to see of you. And there are really three types of resumes. Your chronological, which is probably the most prevalent. The functional, which is useful when you really need to highlight certain areas of expertise. If you have a lot of jobs that have kind of the same descriptions, sometimes a functional is better to avoid redundancy. And then you also have a federal resume, which is necessary when it comes to looking into federal positions, positions with the government, certain agencies, things like that. But really the one that we focus on the most would be the chronological resume. Let's see, and if you head to the next slide, it has a breakdown of the resume, and we're just going to go through it really briefly. The top portion of your resume is really that part that you need to grab the attention of the hiring manager or whoever's going to be looking at your resume first. It consists of three main parts: your heading, your summary of qualifications, and your areas of expertise. And really what this is, heading is simple. It's your name. It's your address if you're looking in the same area. You can omit that if you're looking to relocate. It's your phone number. It's your email address. It's your LinkedIn profile. It's all of those things that you need to have on a resume. I've seen resumes where there is no name at the top. There is no contact information. If there are no ways for people to get in touch with you, they're not going to. It's as simple as that. So you really need to make sure that you have good and accurate contact information on top of your resume. With that, your professional summary, it is the breakdown, it is the summary of everything that you are going to list out in the rest of your resume. You need to highlight your biggest achievements, the positions that you're looking for. It's really in that 10 seconds that somebody's going to pick up and look at your resume. They want to see that you are the right person for the job. They want to see the keywords for the job posting. They want to see that your past qualifications meet what they're looking for, that you have the education that they're looking for. Bullet points of these different types of skills and tasks that you've completed really grab someone's attention, and that's what's going to get them to read the rest of your resume. That's what's going to get them to invite you in for an interview. Kim, do you have more to add with this?
Well, you've hit some really important points, Kristen. Maybe the only thing I'd add is that, the resume is not going to get you the job. It's going to get you the interview. And depending on the size and the types of companies that you're applying for, the human resources folks who are going to be screening your resumes, they don't have a lot of time. And they get hundreds of applicants potentially. Like these larger companies that most of us are familiar with, we can recognize their brand names. There's a lot of competition, and you have to keep in mind that your competition is not just another veteran. You've been used to being around your brothers and sisters, veterans and service members all this while. Your competition is a civilian, and so civilians have, depending on your level of where you are in your career, beginning, middle, you're competing with civilians who've been doing this kind of thing for some of them for quite a long time. So there's a gap. We're here to help you bridge that gap and get up to speed fast enough, but knowing that you're starting behind, you're starting at a disadvantage with this just by virtue of your careers, that's what you've got on your shoulders. So using that professional summary as your 10-second test to entice them into keep reading and keep learning more about who you are. You keep the point of the resume and some of the techniques that we employ, and when you work one-on-one with us, we get a better understanding of what these are, is that to get the reader to spend more time reading about you and understanding what you can do. And of course, there's little tricks that you can do, moving segments of experience around, tailoring it to a job is really critical, and we'll talk more about that here in a later slide. But that first third of the page is going to be really important towards grabbing attention and keeping it for as long as you can, so that your resume goes into the first pile, the interview pile, not the trash, ultimately. So if we can move on, we're going to talk next about just the body of the resume. So we've already covered the first third. What is the rest of this? The rest of this details your positions, job titles, and a lot of them we're probably going to civilianize the title for it, because your specific military title, petty officer of the day, is not going to make any kind of sense for our Navy veterans. Isn't going to make any kind of sense to civilians. So we're going to break that down into a civilian title. Manager, supervisor, team leader, those kinds of things are much more relatable and translatable. So, and then all of the supporting bullets that you describe, each job title is supporting what you did with a combination of metrics and descriptors that show quantifiable and qualifying descriptors about the experience that you bring. So, all right, so that was resumes, and I know we went over it pretty quick. It was really brief, but again, we're talking about the steps. So we've covered strategic planning, we've talked about resumes, so now we're going to talk about networking and that job search. So you've got a good resume, what do you do with it now? How do you find jobs? And so I'll start this off here and then I'll hand it over to Kristen in a second. But networking, I mean, we've all heard that saying that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And there's so much truth to that. I mean, I always argue that, of course, it is what you know. Like, that's important. You need to be qualified for the job. But so are you, and probably tens or hundreds of other people. And what is the company going to want? You know, how are you going to bridge those numbers? How are you going to compete? How are you going to get to the top of that? And it's going to be who you know. So, Kristen, I'll let you kind of explain a little bit more about what networking is, and then how that works to your advantage.
Okay, so networking, it's really just about creating and building relationships, maintaining these relationships. You know, it's scary because you have to go out and talk to people, but talking to people and connecting with them and building relationships and rapport with them can open the door into a company, can kind of set you up for a position that you might not have otherwise found. It's really important. And conveniently, we have resources now, such as LinkedIn, that can really help accelerate the networking process. It can really, you can target where you want to go, who you want to connect with, what companies that you'd like to get to know better, and just kind of move forward that way. But it's very important when you're using sites like this that you make sure that you remain professional and courteous to everyone, even if it's not where you expect to look, or somebody, you know, says something negative to you, you know, don't respond to it negatively. Always treat everything professionally, because, you know, these relationships could develop into more down the line. It could develop into, you know, a casual conversation, could be a job opportunity, it could be, you know, an interview where, you know, you wouldn't have normally gotten an interview. So always maintaining and kind of encouraging these relationships. You know, just talking to people and getting to know them and the company can allow you to access, you know, hidden markets, generate leads to new jobs, but it also helps you develop your value proposition, which is just the conversational version of the executive summary on your resume. It's, you know, allowing you to tell people what you've done, why you're deserving of the job, and, you know, practicing your interviewing skills. These are all advantages to networking. Kim, do you have more with this?
Sure, I can pick it up, and I see we've picked up a viewer here, so thank you for joining us. If you can, do your best here to jump in with us, and just as a reminder, you can go back to the beginning of this viewing or this broadcast. It's going to be on our YouTube channel, so you can catch up on what's left. And you can also register on our website if you're ready for the one-on-one coaching assistance that we have too. But the key thing with networking, you know, it's what you know and who you know. It's really finding out about those jobs before they get advertised. It's the hidden job market, and that is really important. It's really critical that we tap into that. And a lot of people use job boards, and those are advertising for these for the job. So that means a company has a need to hire, and, you know, to get a pool of applicants, they advertise it. But guess, if you can see it, so can everybody else. So your competition is big. However, if you know a friend and they know that they're hiring at their company, and that's an area that you want to work for that company, or it fits into your career background, your friend can tell you, hey, my company's hiring, let me try to get some information from you, or give me your resume, I want to hand it off to the hiring manager. Or even better yet, you can ask them, you know, can you put me in touch with that hiring manager so I can learn more about the job, so I can tell them about what I can do. Now, if you can get in a position like that, leveraging your networking, now you're competing against no one else, and that's your best chances. Those are your best odds. And you know, I can think of, I think, the last 4 jobs that I've ever had in the last 10 years. I've gotten them because someone knew about the posting and told me about it, and either it was a job that wasn't being advertised yet, and they thought of me. You know, I kind of got lucky with that. But primarily it's because it was somebody on the inside who knew about me, who knew about my skills, and who knew about the company and said, hey, Kim, I think you would be great at this job. I'll tell my people, you know, that I can recommend you. And that basically can oftentimes help you jump that competition right to the stack of interviewers. So you can go in and be yourself and you know, get through those kind of initial screening steps, you know, and get into the interview right away. So that's really one of the key things. So we're talking about interviews here, so let's just jump into that. The last topic here we wanted to discuss was, what is the interview, what goes on there, how do I do it, and some basic key items about that. So what is a successful interview? How do you have one? There's a lot going in there, and a lot of it's just going to be you being yourself, being authentic, knowing how to communicate you, what you're about, and how you fit in that world, and how you see how you fit in with that company. So during your job search, you're doing a lot of research. Kristen talked about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is an amazing resource for can be a great resource for learning about a company, learning about jobs. So you're doing research on the company, understanding what their business is, what their values, what their mission is. You're going to make sure that that matches you. If there's a mismatch there, you're not going to have any success. If it's apparent to you that you're not going to fit into the mission or the culture of a particular company, and you're getting that off of what you're reading about them on their website, what's in the news about them, it's going to be very evident to the company as well if you were to get an interview. So you don't want to waste your time on companies you don't understand or that don't seem to fit with what you're about. Because companies are very, very keyed into those kinds of cues. You know, they're looking for people who they can bring in and fit in right away. And you're just going to you're going to be that person who either fits or doesn't. There's no point in trying to, if you're the round peg, you don't want to be the round peg trying to fit into the square hole. You're not going to be happy in it. You're not, and they're going to recognize that right away. So the only way to know that is to do your research ahead of time. As a part of that research, you're going to be tailoring your resume. There's going to be maybe some play on words, keywords that you might want to change in your resume. We talk about tailoring. You know, most of that's going to happen in your professional summary at the beginning part of your resume. We can help you with that. So go ahead. You know, you can sign up for our services and register with us. We can get a lot more in depth about that. So let's see, you've applied to a job, you've done some company research, so you've tailored your resume right, you've gone ahead and applied, and let's say you hear back a couple weeks later, they're interested in interviewing you. So like, wow, you got that one on the line, now you're on the hook. So you're going to continue to do your researching as much as you can. You can be on LinkedIn trying to connect with people who currently work there or worked there in the past and using them to ask for information. Hey, I'm interested in your company. I had some questions. Are you willing to, answer them or connect with me? There's probably there are some standardized questions that a lot of companies ask in an interview. Usually the first one is, so tell me about yourself. So having a prepared answer for those most common with your interview preparation. We have a list of those. I believe it's on our website. It can be found easily with a Google search. But when people ask you that question, so tell me about yourself, this is where you get to communicate in about 3 or 4 sentences or in a minute or less who you are, what you're about, why you matter, how you fit in their world. So that's taken usually some of those key points taken from your professional summary in your resume. So it's not a memorized script. This is you knowing you and what your skill sets are, what your transferable skills are, and telling that comfortably, authentically. And the only way you can do that is by doing a rehearsal, doing a practice, doing the research on yourself. So all of this that I'm saying is just, the point is, you can't just show up and wing it. All right, it's going to be really clear. I've been in interviews for myself. I've sat on the other end of the table and seen people come in, and I've been the interviewer, and it becomes very clear right away who's done their homework, who's got it together, and who doesn't. So, you know, being comfortable doing your homework ahead of time is the key thing. We can mention, you know, coming prepared, dressed appropriately, bring your portfolio, and by that I mean it's a copy of your resume. It could be some letters of recommendation that you have on hand if they ask you for them. During the interview, you know, staying at ease, staying confident, being yourself, being a professional. And then after the interview, you're gonna wrap it up with some professional courtesies. So our next slide, we're talking about researching the company and you. A lot of people put a lot of emphasis and, you know, oh, I should know what the company is about. And, you know, you've been around 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We assist veterans and spouses of all ages. But how well do you know yourself, and knowing not just you, but where you fit in the world? So talking to people even about you and how you like to work. So we've already touched on mission statement, company's vision. See if you can find out in the media about about the company with current accounts, what's going on with them. Do they have any big projects that you need to be aware of? So you might get asked in the interview, you know, hey, if you're working on this account and you encounter this type of challenge, how would you respond? And you're not caught totally off guard with questions like that. Or even better yet, if you're the one bringing up these types of things, that's going to be an indicator to them that, hey, this person knows what they're talking about. They did their research, and it makes it easier for them to envision you already doing that job. Because that's what your civilian counterparts are going to be doing. That's what your competition is going to be doing. We need to be doing the same. So, all right, Kristen, I'll let you handle there's some tips for all interviews, and it runs a spectrum from sight, sound, scent, presence, and we're nearing the end here. So stay with us a little bit longer because Kristen's going to cover some important key points about key points about interviews.
Yeah, so tips for interviews pretty much covers all of the 5 senses. You know, what you look like. Are you professional? Are you fitting into the culture that they are? Some companies are more casual, but you should always err on the side of conservative. Smile, be interested, be engaging. If you just sit there with a straight face and you only answer in short words, they're going to think you're not interested. And if you're not interested, they're not interested in you. You know, so make sure that you come in professionally, that you come in dressed appropriately, that you're, that you're prepared for that day, that you look prepared. When it comes to answering questions, don't fill in with a lot of filler words like I do. You want to avoid saying and you want to make sure that your answers are concise but not too short. You know, stay on topic. Avoid hot topics. Nobody wants to hear about religion and politics in your interview. That's really just going to make people not interested. You're not going to get more friends with that. You're really just going to turn people away. So just make sure that you're appropriately dressed and that you're appropriately prepared to talk on the right subjects. If you're a smoker, don't smoke before your interview. You can't get rid of that smell once you've smoked. Then you're going to go into the interview and people are just going to smell that on you. You know, go easy on the perfume and the cologne. I once interviewed somebody that just reeked of cologne. I walked out of my office 20 minutes later. I walked back in and I could still smell it. That's all I could smell in my office for the rest of the day. You don't want to have that happen because that's just all people are going to associate with you. Even his resume smelled like it afterwards. And so I knew exactly who it was who I had interviewed, and it was not exactly a pleasant association. So, you know, avoid anything extreme like that. and just be aware of the presence that you have. Be confident, but don't be cocky. Maintain eye contact. Don't fidget. I like to talk with my hands. Try to keep that to a minimum. Just make sure that you're professional and that you're actively engaged in the interview. You don't want to just sit there and let them do all the talking. The interview is as much for you as it is for the interviewer. You need to make sure that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. It's really for you. So go in confident that maybe this company won't turn out to be the one that you want. And just kind of maintain that air about yourself the whole time, because if you're not happy, you're not going to stick with the job. And if you're not going to stick with the job, then you're back in the same position. So putting that effort forward at the beginning will help in the long run. Let's see, did I miss anything there?
No, Kristen, I think you covered it all, and it was especially, you reminded me that the issue with the cologne and how you remembered that candidate. You want to be memorable, but you don't want to be memorable like that. In an issue with veterans, sometimes I know you should be proud of your service, absolutely, and your experience. And I find this a lot with some of the Marines and the soldiers that I've worked with who've had time in combat. You can be proud of your combat action ribbon and your combat badge. Maybe it's on those types of things, or if you get questions about, so tell me about your time in the Army, or tell me about combat. If for some reason your interviewer wants to go in that direction, and they shouldn't, but every once in a while you might get someone who just can't help themselves and wants to know more about who you are, or to figure out if you're if you're really that stereotype that they think that they have that's out there about veterans. Those are tough questions to address. I think the key way to kind of dodge that bullet is just to say, hey, those experiences help make me who I am today, and here, let me tell you about those advantages. And you can go back to explaining, well, hey, look, I'm a veteran. I've got this level of commitment to the organization. I come in with a little more team mindset towards teamwork, and kind of steer the conversation away from questions that aren't relevant to the job. So that gets into a little bit of a higher level that we're not going to get into deeply here in this conversation. That can come up in our. That's a good question to ask during our the interview class, and then working one-on-one with us. But the interview is your opportunity to show your personality professionally, and to say, to reassure the people, here's who I am, here's what I'm thinking about the job and the direction and getting information. So, Kristen, you absolutely hit it on the head. I'm glad you said it. The interview is as much for you as it is for them. You're not the yes man or the yes woman, catering yourself to them because you're desperate or anything. This is you being curious, asking questions back, coming prepared with some questions as well, so that you can get additional information and feel good to make a more educated decision if this is a company you want to work with. You spend a lot of time at work in your whole life. You want to make sure it's the right fit. So, all right, after the interview, those professional courtesies that I mentioned, what are those? You're going to say thank you in the interview, and you're going to ask them in the interview, I'd like to follow up with you later. I'd like to send thank you notes to, if it was a panel interview or if it was a one-on-one, do you prefer email? Who do I send it to? What's your email address? Take those notes down in the interview, and then send those out the same day or day after. You need to do it very timely. Sometimes the hiring process can happen very quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time. We always recommend, or I've heard conflicting things. I've heard send an email. I've also heard send a thank you note. I've done both. The email shows up right away. They can see it should be a given, or that you're saying thank you. It doesn't have to be long, but you thank you for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to learn more about your company. Look forward to hearing from you. If you want to use a thank you letter or a thank you note on one of those small thank you note cards, simple, plain. I always came prepared with them kind of filled out, or at least I bring the envelopes and the cards with me, and so then I could fill them out in the car, or I could fill them out somewhere and hand them to the receptionist, or on my way out, or I get the address and I can mail it right away, the same day or day after, so they get it very quickly. But you know, what are you going to remember most? You're going to remember getting a thank you email, or you're going to remember getting a thank you note. So I like to send I'm a little old-fashioned, like my handwriting. You could do both. There's no harm in doing that. And then one of your questions in the interview is going to be, you know, how long or how soon do you plan to make a decision? So then if they say, well, you know, we'll tell you either way in 2 weeks. So then you know that after that 3rd week, you can wait a week. If you haven't heard anything, you can follow up with them in the manner that they've recommended, to say, hey, you know, it's Kim, calling to check in to see, you know, hiring process, where that stands. If there's any additional questions I can help answer, and they should be able to tell you something. You know, we didn't mention this earlier, but you know, I think it's okay to mention this now, that these days employers are not very good with the follow-up. If you weren't selected, you're probably just not going to hear from them at all, and that's rude. That's rude in my opinion, but unfortunately it's become kind of a standard practice. You know, the companies that are good, you know, will follow up with you and say, I'm sorry, you know, hey, we made a decision, we've went with another candidate, and at least you know you have some closure that didn't work out in your favor. But I think if you walk in with manage your own expectations with this too. I mean, if they want you, they'll stay in touch with you. What I'm saying is, don't put all your eggs in that basket, or expect, you know, if you think it went well with you, it's quite possible it went well with them, but you don't know how the other candidates worked out. So what I mean is, don't delay your job-seeking efforts or say no to a job because you thought for sure you were going to get that one. I've heard of way too many stories where people thought, oh, they led me to believe I was going to get that job, so I didn't apply to anything else, or I said no to another opportunity. You know, be talking to your resources, be talking to us, be talking to other colleagues who can help you out with these types of situations, so that you're not putting yourself into a disadvantage, or, you know, or a position where you're not empowered, or a company that's just not being responsive. So, all right, that more or less wraps up what we had here to say. Kristen, is there anything that you can add to that here before we take questions or sign off?
Yes, I do have one thing. You know, always follow up, but don't be that person that follows up too much. Every job posting always ends up with that one person who, you know, you give them a timeline that we're going to make a decision 2 weeks out, but by the end of the 1st week you've received 25 emails from them. That's just going to give a negative impression. It doesn't seem eager, it seems over-eager. And, you know, there's always that fine line, and while communication is easier now, just sending an email seems less intrusive, it does kind of pile up. So, you know, make sure you ask how long it's going to be, and then don't infringe upon that. Don't push it. You know, make yourself, you know, desirable, that you know how to ask, but that you also know when to not ask too much. So that was just the only other point I wanted to make. So are there any questions?
All right, since there are no questions, thank you all thank both of you for a great presentation, and thank you, Laurie, for signing in. And we'll get a veteran treasury specialist out to you probably as soon as either end of this week or early next week, just because they're still working on their load from this past week. But we've got you in our system, so no worries there. But thank you to both Kim, Chris, and Kim actually dropped off, so that's probably how we had a little awkward silence there. But thank you all, and we'll see you next week.